You know, some stories don't really end. They just echo. Years after Jeffrey Epstein's death, his name is still sending these massive shockwaves through the highest levels of power, politics, you name it. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to trace those echoes and figure out how a single, really controversial legal deal from more than a decade ago is somehow still making headlines. And really, it all boils down to this one question. A deal was signed way back in 2007 that honestly should have been the end of a federal investigation into Epstein. But instead of being an ending, it turned out to be the beginning of a story that has just spiraled out and gotten more and more complex, touching everything from presidential politics to the absolute darkest corners of the internet. So, to really get a handle on these echoes, we have to go back to the original event, the deal itself. It's been called the deal of a lifetime, and when you hear the details, you'll see why. It's pretty staggering. Okay, just look at this timeline for a second. In May of 2007, federal prosecutors had a massive 60-count indictment drafted and ready to go. This was serious stuff. But then, just 4 months later, poof, it's gone, replaced by a secret non-prosecution agreement, or NPA. And that deal let Epstein sidestep that entire federal case, plead to way lesser state charges, and serve a ridiculously short sentence in a county jail where he even had work release.
But here is the most important, the most absolutely crucial part of this whole thing, the immunity. It wasn't just for Epstein. The agreement gave a complete free pass from federal prosecution to 4 other named individuals. And this part is just unbelievable, to any potential co-conspirators. That one little phrase right there is a huge reason this story just will not die.
Well, you can imagine a deal this sweet was so controversial that eventually the government had to investigate itself. The Department of Justice was basically forced to take a long, hard look in the mirror. So after some absolutely explosive reporting by the Miami Herald back in 2018, public outrage just boiled over. It forced the DOJ's own internal watchdog, the Office of Professional Responsibility, to open an investigation into how its own prosecutors handled this case. The big question was this just bad lawyering, or was it actual professional misconduct? And here is one of the core findings, and this is coming straight from a federal court. Prosecutors actively misled Epstein's victims. They were telling them the investigation was still going on after they had already secretly signed the deal that made sure no federal charges would ever be filed. I mean, the law here is crystal clear. The Crime Victims' Rights Act says victims have a right to talk with prosecutors about a plea deal. But in this case, that just didn't happen. The DOJ's own report confirmed it. Prosecutors didn't just fail to consult the victims, they sent them letters that flat out misrepresented what was going on with the case. It was a direct contradiction of what they were legally supposed to do. So after all that, what was the big conclusion from the DOJ's own internal investigation? Was it professional misconduct? Nope. They concluded that the U.S. attorney at the time, Alexander Acosta, and his whole team exercised poor judgment. And as you can probably guess, for a lot of people, that felt like a massive understanding. Okay, so let's start tracing the first major echo, the political one. Because, as you know, when a really damaging story just refuses to go away, a very common strategy is to, well, just change the subject. It's a classic move right out of the political playbook, and academics even have a name for it: strategic diversion. The idea is super simple. When you're getting hammered by a scandal, you create a brand new, totally unrelated fire to get all the cameras to turn and look over there. And one fascinating study looked at whether this is exactly what happened during a huge wave of Epstein revelations. Now, I know this chart looks a little complicated, but the story it tells is actually pretty straightforward. See that vertical line? That's the moment the media started talking about Epstein. A lot. And that blue line that spikes up right after? That shows how unusual or, off-topic Donald Trump's social media posts suddenly became. You can see it. It shoots up almost immediately. So what does all that mean? Well, the researchers actually put a number on it. What they found was the more that Fox News covered the damaging Epstein story, the more Trump's posts would veer off into new, completely unrelated topics. The study's conclusion? This probably wasn't a coincidence. It was very likely a deliberate strategy to change the national conversation. So from the political, we're going to move to the conspiratorial. The next echo shows how some really strange details from the case files got twisted to breathe new life into an old and totally debunked conspiracy theory. This is the number that sent conspiracy forums into a complete and utter frenzy. Over 900. That is how many times the word pizza appears in the recently released Epstein court documents. Just a weird, random detail that online sleuths immediately grabbed onto. And this gave a bizarre second life to Pizzagate, right? That completely debunked 2016 conspiracy theory. The original was based on hacked political emails. But this new version, the revival, latched on to those 900-plus pizza references in the Epstein files as if it were some kind of proof. And even though that original theory was completely debunked years ago, this new evidence was enough to make it go viral all over again with a whole new generation. And all of that brings us to the most recent echo, which is really more like a continuous roar at this point. Because thanks to new legislation, millions of files are being released to the public, and the revelations just keep on coming. A recent analysis by The Guardian of these new files turned up some absolutely stunning details. First, Epstein's lawyers were apparently talking about him potentially cooperating with prosecutors just days before he died. And the list of powerful names, it just keeps growing. Like, we're talking an invitation for Epstein to Buckingham Palace from Prince Andrew, and bank records that seem to reference a former top UK politician, Peter Mandelson. But the files also reveal all these new connections to the worlds of business and tech. We're seeing emails that show way more extensive ties to Elon Musk than anyone knew about before. There's an email from Richard Branson joking about Epstein bringing his harem to a meeting. And we even see that a future U.S. Secretary of Commerce, Howard Lutnick, had arranged a visit to Epstein's island. And the connections, they just keep stretching, right into Hollywood and sports. There's a photo of the director Brett Ratner with Epstein. The co-owner of the New York Giants, Steve Tisch, is mentioned hundreds of times. The head of the LA Olympics Committee, Casey Wasserman, is seen in suggestive emails with Ghislaine Maxwell. It's just everywhere. So you might be wondering, why is all of this coming out right now? Well, it's not a leak or a hack. It's actually because of a landmark piece of legislation that mandated the full, public disclosure of all documents related to the Epstein case. This is a deliberate act to finally bring everything into the light. And that leaves us with the final and really unavoidable question. Remember, this was all just a look at the first few million files. As journalists and investigators keep digging through the rest, we just have to wonder, what new names are going to surface? What new connections will be revealed? What new echoes from this one single case are still out there, just waiting for us to hear them?